Andrew Jordan again for another video. This will begin a new series about Sephardic Romance languages spoken by the Jews of Spain and Portugal, originally in Spain and Portugal, and throughout the diaspora after the events of 1492 and the expulsion of Jews from Spain. If you enjoy my content, I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Facebook and Twitter, as well as following my writing at www.drajordan.com, drajordan.com. Let's get started. Today I wanted to go over the concept of a Jewish language within modern linguistics, and also to explore some of the history of Jews in Spain, which is important background information for the rest of this series, exploring Jewish Romance languages. What is a Jewish language? Jewish languages are types of linguistic repertoires that allows Jews to express themselves in differentiation from non-Jewish populations where they happen to live. And Jewish linguistic repertoires are spoken and used in Jewish communities in diglossic relationships with Hebrew and Aramaic, the languages of Jewish prayer and text study, noting that the corpus of rabbinic literature is written in Hebrew and Aramaic in the Talmud and the Mishnah, and obviously the Torah itself being written in Hebrew. There are a number of problems or issues that must be confronted when dealing with Jewish linguistic repertoires, particularly that the type of variety that is spoken is often difficult to differentiate between what would be considered a language or a dialect, which we'll see throughout the video and future video series. For example, the varieties of English spoken by Jewish individuals in the United States are mostly indistinguishable from non-Jewish varieties, except for the religious and cultural vocabulary that is borrowed from Hebrew, Aramaic, and also Yiddish. So the Jewish linguistic repertoire is officially defined as the linguistic features that Jews have access to that distinguish their speech or writing from local non-Jews. This is important because Jews throughout history, except for the modern period, have shared spaces with non-Jews and languages. And sometimes these varieties are maintained after Jews are forcibly or voluntarily leave one part of the world for another. For example, the prevalence of the Yiddish language in American Ashkenazi Jewish communities, from the origin of Jewish communities in Ashkenazi Jewish communities in Europe, Eastern Europe mostly, some Central Europe. And the language of Yiddish, which is a variety of German, was brought to the United States with Yiddish-speaking Jewish immigrants and maintained for some time afterwards, and even experiencing revival today among younger speakers who would like to revive fluency in that language. So that sets up the issue of what is a Jewish language, and I'd like to quickly go through the history of Spain and Sephardic Jews. Jews had been living in Spain for a long time, with early Jewish presence in Greek and Phoenician ports in the Greco-Roman period. The name Sepharad in Hebrew was associated with Spain and Portugal from an early time onward. Here we can see a map of Hispania Romana, the Roman provincial system in modern-day Spain and Portugal. And so the Jews were found along the coast here, where perhaps around where modern Barcelona and Valencia are located. Jewish communities lived in Roman Spain, obviously, and there's traditions going back to the first temple, although those are hard to establish. These Hispanic, to use a modern term, Hispania Jews, established themselves in the south of Andalusia, the Levante, and Catalonia, which if we return back to the map is what I was just pointing, but I didn't indicate also further down here. So all along the coast of modern-day Spain, there were Jewish communities from Roman times, particularly in Cadiz, Malaga, Cartagena, Tarragona, and the Isle of Ibiza, which is here on the Balearic Islands. Jews in Hispania were wealthy, as was the Roman province of Hispania in general. As the religion of Christianity began to rise in the Roman society, Judaism suffered because of this rise of the competitor religion in Christianity. In Spain itself, in Roman Spain, the Council of Elvira in 306 CE placed restrictions on Christian and Jewish interaction and isolated Jews from other citizens, which implies that there was a bit of social interaction if it needed to be limited or restricted. The situation of Jews in Spain changed with the conquest of Hispania by Germanic tribes, the Suevi, the Vandals, and the Alani, and later the Visigoths, who brought further chaos into the life of the Jewish community in particular, and also in the prosperity of the peninsula. The Visigoths and other Germanic tribes were Arian Christians, differing slightly from the standard, or perhaps better expressed, Orthodox Catholic Church, differing in their interpretation of the doctrine of the Trinity, broadly speaking. At the beginning, Arian Christians were more favorably towards Jews, but as the Visigoths converted to Roman Catholicism, this brought about further alienation of Jews and further intolerance from the state's perspective. The Council of Toledo regulated relations between Jews and Christians further, with the intent to limit Jewish influence on Christianity, and also led to the first incidents of forced conversions to Christianity and the emergence of crypto-Judaism, the maintenance of Jewish tradition in secret or private, while publicly expressing Catholic Christian identity. Here we can see the map of Islamic Spain happening in the 8th century CE, with the Muslims conquering the majority of the peninsula up to the very slim land in Asturias and parts of the modern Basque country and parts of modern Aragon and Catalonia that were not conquered. As time went on, the Christians in the north began to regroup and reconquer the peninsula over a period of many centuries. The Moors or Muslims conquered Spain from North Africa by 715 CE. At the beginning, Jews welcomed the arrival of Muslim armies and thought of them as liberators and allied themselves with the Muslims. The conquest of Spain by Muslims brought about an era of peace, and that was noted by the flowering of art, science, architecture, philosophy, and a religious tolerance that was unknown throughout medieval Europe, often called the convivencia by Jews, and which was allowed for Jews, Muslims, and Christians to live together. Not all was perfect, but it was an improvement to Visigothic Spain for Jewish residents of Spain. The early Muslim rulers were more cosmopolitan and liberal than other Muslims in the world, but later changes in Muslim Spain would lead to changes in the state's administration that would lead to further religious extremism and fundamentalism. The city of Cordoba, in particular, became a sort of hub for Jewish life and also Arab cultural life because it was the capital of Muslim Al-Andalus, and it became an important city in the Muslim world, competing with Baghdad and Constantinople. It was a center for Jewish life, as well as in Lucena, where there were important Beit Midrash study halls and important authors and writers from the Jewish world. And there were other parts of Muslim Spain that included important Jewish centers in the medieval world. In Islam, Jews are known as dhimis, or people of the book, which implies a lower but protected religious status that leads to the requirement of paying a special tax, and which exempted them from conversion to Islam, but with a lower social status. However, this lower status was better than the status that Jews experienced under Christian rule, and allowed them certain freedoms and allowed them to practice their faith freely, more or less, and nurture communal organizations and practice trade, and also to experience freedom of movement, which was important. And that was why Spain became such a center of religious activity among early medieval Jews. In this environment, Jewish multilingualism was very important, as Jews had access to Semitic languages through Hebrew and often through understanding or even speaking Arabic, and also had access to Romance languages by speaking Latin or local Romance varieties, which would later become Spanish. And the Jews often served as translators between the Muslims and the Christians. As we mentioned earlier, around 800, the Asturian king Pelayo confronted the Moors and began to reconquer the peninsula from the Moors, from the Muslims. The kingdoms of Asturias, Navarre, and Aragon were the first Christian kings to establish freedom for themselves from the Muslims. Eventually, the Caliphate of Cordoba fell, and and other Arab leaders from North Africa arrived, and brought with them persecution of Jews due to their more pious Islamic faith. And some Jews even sought refuge in the Christian kingdoms in the north. Jews typically lived in places called juderias, which were a neighborhood that had a synagogue and was where most of the Jews lived. They had, and throughout this period in Spain, there were rabbinical courts, or batedin, who held councils to administer certain parts of Jewish civil life in a certain way of expressing legal separation and freedom, although not entirely so. And there were juderias, or Jewish areas, in many cities throughout Spain: Toledo, Seville, Valencia, Barcelona, Zaragoza, Lisbon, in modern Portugal, and throughout the Iberian Peninsula. As the Christian conquest of Spain succeeded, the Christian religion became ascendant throughout the peninsula, which led to the next instance of forced conversion in 1391, with around 100,000 Jews converting, 100,000 Jews fleeing, and 100,000 Jews being murdered in acts of anti-Semitic violence by local Christians. This pattern would obviously be repeated throughout the next century or so. Jews in Spain were culturally divided between Castilian Northern Spanish, Andalusian Southern Spanish, and Catalan Eastern Spanish varieties. This is reflected in the legacy left by each community. The famous Moses Maimonides, known in Jewish circles as the Rambam, and the Rif, and other important writers from this period, were representative of Andalusian Jews. Nachmanides, or the Ramban, was a representative of Catalan Jews, and Castilian Jews did not leave as much of a legacy in the sense of having famous authors. In 1492, about 100 years after the incident of forced conversion that we spoke of a second ago, was enacted, which created what we now know as Sephardic Judaism. Jews from Spain who were in diaspora elsewhere. Jews left Spain and went to the other parts of the Muslim world, in Turkey, Syria, and other places. Egypt became known as Eastern Sephardic Jews. And those who converted to Christianity and maintained crypto-Jewish practices became known as Western Sephardic Jews, and lived in France, Netherlands, and Italy, and the New World in New York and Brazil and the Caribbean, after reverting to Judaism. So that's where I want to stop today. In the next video, I will explore Old Spanish and the development of Jewish varieties of the Spanish language. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing and following me on Facebook and Twitter, as well as checking out my website at www.drajordan.com. Have a nice day.